Yeah, and I think that's also just kind of reflection of just culture in a sense within the last 30 years. It's more about kind of immediacy. So I feel like a lot of wrestlers now think they have to breeze through everything without like letting things breathe. Like I was watching your match, and one thing you never really see anymore is a ref counting to 10 when both people are down. Just like the small breather spots that let the crowd rest. Just like we keep talking in circles about the psychology, but it's really just the little things that build up and make it that much more intense.
It does, Drew. Our philosophy, our psychology, our philosophy was get the most out of the least, which is what you're pointing to. Taking, you call it breathing moments, you call a pause in the action. I mean, you, the fan, the opportunity to actually comprehend what you just saw in the ring. And that before you moved into whatever you're going to do next. And so that was a part of the psychology. I know we're kind of, but that's what it was. I love what you said. Those breathing moments. I mean, because our goal was, we realized we didn't have to go out there and do 100 moves. We could do 10 moves. In fact, you want to see some classic match, go back to the 50s and 60s and watch some of those with Bruno Sammartino and stuff. When Ivan won the belt against Bruno. I mean, they did you might say hardly anything in the ring.
Yeah.
But when you watch the fan reaction, when they did something, oh my gosh, it meant something.
No, definitely. I like. I was the Barry Windham match. I keep bringing that up, but I was just watching it, and the crowd reactions were crazy. And I watched some of the promos build up too, and how he did the contract signing in front of his mom, and just
Magnum.
Magnum. Who
Yeah,
did I say?
Barry Windham, but
Oh, I'm sorry. Magnum
I have
TA
matches
rather.
against him too. But
Yeah,
yeah, Magnum with the contract signing. Yes.
it's because I was reading from my notes, and I was gonna also bring up when you turn face later on, but one thing I wanted to kind of get into is obviously debuted as Ivan Koloff's nephew, so you have to immediately play Russian, and I've read that you learned Russian to make the gimmick more authentic.
Well, what I did is, I mean, I do, for the record, I do not speak fluent Russian, for
Right,
the record. But what I did was I
heel
learned
Russian.
put a few phrases together that for a real Russian probably wouldn't mean anything, but it sounded Russian. People bought into it, believed it. You know, I legally changed my name, learned to write my name in Russian. Eventually, it took about 6 months to develop the accent, and and develop that character. So night after night and night after night, I just went out to destroy opponents while working on that accent that I eventually would introduce, people to. And all these years later, Drew, I still run into people who are like, dude, where's your accent? It retired when I retired.
That's it's really funny because especially at that time, kind of like still during the Cold War, obviously, and so you really debut at a great time to be a Russian in terms of getting
Oh yeah,
heat, and then you go a couple little more years, and then it's suddenly the very worst time to be a Russian after we start to work everything out, and Gorbachev's like
right.
starting it, like becoming like a celebrity here. So how was it just having to kind of adapt to being a face after most of your experience coming as a heel?
Well, I'm glad I got to experience both sides of it. Let me just say that. And you mentioned Magnum TA, and for those not familiar, his career ended short with a car wreck that broke his neck, and left an opening, left a void on the other side. As a partner for Dusty. And I think it was a brilliant move by Dusty and Jim Crockett to move me into that slot and create the superpowers, which for the next 2+ years we did sellout business wherever we went. Someone had asked Dusty prior to his passing years later, did he know it would work when they did it? And he said, no, nobody had any idea whether it would work or not, but it did. It got over, and so I look back on that switch with wonderful memories, and just glad, grateful, blessed that I really feel I had the opportunity to experience both sides of it.
Speaking of over, I mean, it was incredibly over. It was such a huge pop. Are there kind of any other moments in your career that stand out in terms of just like sheer magnitude? Because that really was like a big game changer for the company and yourself as well.
I mean, that's certainly ranks right up there. The very first ever Great American Bash in Charlotte against the Nature Boy Ric Flair. I mean, Drew, I was only, again, I'm as green as can be at really still. I was only 13 months into the business. I was already the world tag team champion, the world 6-man champion, and I'm main event against the Nature Boy Ric Flair for the world heavyweight title, and 25, 30, 35,000 people. And so that was a highlight. You mentioned the War Games, the very first War Games, the original, the very first one. They were all fun, but there was nothing like that original one, the very first one. Those would probably, the best of 7 against Magnum. So the best of 7 against Magnum, Great American Bash against Flair, the turn, becoming the superpowers, and the War Games, probably my all rank right up there at the top.
And speaking of top moments, who are some of your top favorite wrestlers to work with? Because obviously when you debuted, you have the Horsemen, you have Dusty, you said you worked with Rick, and I know you worked with Sting a bit as well, and also the Road Warriors. So that's really a very strong list, especially with someone who only wrestled for about 8 years. So who are some other?
I mean, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. You go right down the list. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Stone Cold Steve Austin. I joke and say before he shaved his head and took on my likeness. Idea, Drew, what he was called before he went?
Stunning Steve Austin.
Stunning Steve, the blonde hair, and we even traveled together a little bit back in the day. So Austin, you mentioned Undertaker. Who was he before the Undertaker?
Mean Gene, Mark Callis.
Mean Mark Callis,
rather. Yeah.
So matches against Callis, against Cactus Jack before he became Mankind. Some legendary guys. Let's go back a little further. Dory Funk Jr. Funk, Blackjack Mulligan, Barry Windham's dad, Dick Murdoch, Dirty Dick Murdoch, or the Redneck Dick Murdoch, whatever you want to call him. Wahoo McDaniel.
Yep.
Rick Rude, Ravishing Rick Rude. I mean, there's so many that sometimes I forget, and fans will post stuff on social media, and I go, "Oh my gosh, Diamond Dallas Page." I'm like,
yeah.
I hate to say it, I don't even remember wrestling Diamond, but I did, So, a lot of guys.
And you're speaking of forgetting too. That's obviously a side effect of having to work so much. And I was watching an interview, and you said that you worked, was it 454 matches in
Very good.
1 year?
1986, 454 matches.
What is, obviously you still have youth on your side, but still that's
yeah. I'm pretty sure they don't do that anymore.
I can't even grasp it. That's
hard to wrap your head around that, right? You're like, wait a minute, there's only 365 days in a year. How'd that work? But anyway, yeah, I don't even know how many shows they do nowadays, but I can't imagine the guys probably wrestle more than 100 times a year now.
they I think it's oh, I think it's 320 kind of. That depends on the talent and other commitments, I think. But I I think I read that a couple years ago, so I'm not sure what the figure is now, but it's I don't know if that's right. But still, nonetheless. So, what was your kind of typical schedule whenever you were wrestling, if there really even was one?
Oh, there was. I mean, we were handed, booking sheet every week, kind of tell you what town you're in, who you're working against, and so you could kind of mentally prepare, and of course, back in those days, it was typically programs. So, I might have wrestled Ric Flair for 6 months, and it was just a question of what town I was in, and then what was it, what was the outcome, what were we trying to accomplish in that town, and so it was you could potentially wrestle back in those days, obviously night after night after night, and even 2 or 3 times on the weekends, house shows in the afternoon and evenings, and TV tapings in the mornings. And so, I mean, the weekends were the most grueling because when we went on the Superstation, I mean, we'd have to be at that studio at 8 a.m. and ready to go, and tape 3 hours of shows for Saturday night and Sunday night. And then we'd probably have a house show that afternoon, an evening show somewhere else, another house show Sunday afternoon, another evening show Sunday night, all in different towns. And so, you're booking it to get from one place to the next, and it was just a groove. You just got in a groove, and you just did it.
So, you got to get good at reading maps. Uh,
Yeah, what's funny about that? Like I was coming back. I spent Easter weekend with my grandchildren in Nashville, Tennessee, and my trip was extended by probably close to an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, because of GPS rerouting me past stop traffic, blocked roads and everything else. And what was funny, Drew, was I remember I was through the mountains of Tennessee, on my way, to get into North Carolina. And I literally thought to myself yesterday, I thought, what do we do back in what do we do with GPS? I mean, it would have taken 20 hours to make that trip, or we would have sat in traffic because we wouldn't have known the road was blocked up ahead or whatever, right? So, yeah, it's crazy to think about the big Rand McNally map that we used back then to get from town to town, like for real.
Speaking of being stuck in cars, who were some of your favorite people to travel with throughout your career?
Well, initially, of course, Ivan and Don Kernodle, Uncle Ivan, and we had a great time traveling together, um, and there were a number of guys. Like I traveled, is Ricky Steamboat and I would travel sometimes together. As I mentioned, Stone Cold a little bit. Lex Luger and I traveled together some, and probably the funnest crew. You can picture this in one car: Lex Luger, Nikita Koloff, Sting, and Road Warrior Animal, all in one car.
That would have been a limo.
Yeah, it should have been a limo, but we weren't the jet flying limousine riding. So
Baby
it
faces.
was a big Cadillac usually, but so it was somewhat comfortable, but a lot of beef in that car. But yeah, and there was some fun trips that the four of us had together.
That's I heard that Steve Austin, someone had asked him a question before about his experiences with you, and he really just ranted about how much he enjoyed hanging out with you and wrestling, maybe not with you, but traveling with you and stuff. So that's just very nice to hear. People have good experiences.
Yeah, and I'd recently heard that, and I appreciate it. I have vivid memories, and because I heard he mentioned how had kind of when it came to budgeting. Again, nobody was making millions of dollars back then, and nor did I ever in my personal career. But so you were pretty conscious about budgeting your expenses and stuff, and I understand he kind of referenced that, And one of the fondest memories I remember of Steve was, sitting in the dressing room, and he had just bought outside of Atlanta, he bought this property with this lake on it, this beautiful drive-in. I just remember how, yeah, he was showing the pictures around. Again, no cell phones. It was an actual photograph. But he was just so proud of that piece of property he bought. And anyway, so yeah, I'm grateful for Steve and saying those kind things.
Very nice. So we were mentioning how much you're traveling and your schedule. As a professional wrestler, what were kind of your experiences health-wise, and in terms of injuries, and how did you deal with those physically, mentally, and were you taken well care of?
Well, were we taken well care of? Was that the question?
Yeah.
No, the business has changed.
Yeah.
Days you were an independent contractor. Nobody had insurance because we were considered very high risk. And so, you just pay and go. You pay as you go. You get injured, you have to go to the hospital. It comes out of your pocket. And so there was no doctors on call, no doctors on site. And so, you were kind of, at least for me, I was groomed to keep myself in shape and to eat right and exercise, work out every day. And I fortunately didn't have any major injuries or career-ending injuries, although I had my share of injuries. I mean, my lower back right now, my sacroiliac, gives me trouble sometimes. My neck, the base of my neck. I mean, there's deteriorating disc and bone spurring arthritis, and so I got aches and pains. We're human crash dummies. You're going to. In my very last match against Big Van Vader, he had a reputation for being a bit reckless, and he actually did injure my neck that night. And then I didn't know till the next day. I had a pain in my lower abdomen. He's a legit 450, 500-pound guy, and I got a hernia picking him up for, I guess, for a body slam, and had a hernia surgery. It was over that time frame of Thanksgiving and Christmas, recovering from the hernia surgery, rehabilitating my neck, that I made the ultimate decision. I'm done. I'm done. I'm walking away, as a main event wrestler. I'm done.
Hey, yeah, that's very interesting, because you see a lot of people. And another reason to bring up how this wasn't necessarily your childhood dream, but like a lot of people just kind of hold on to it because they're scared, like what else am I going to do afterwards? And
It's true. It's true. I used to argue with guys. They shall remain nameless, but if I name them, most would know. And there were several that I would argue with. I'm like, guys, there's life after wrestling. You can do other things. They're like, no, this is all I know how to do. I can't do anything. I go, don't sell yourself so short. In fact, I had a conversation with Bill Watts one time when he was brought in as booker for WCW. And I said, Bill, I have a college degree. I have health clubs. I go, I can do other things. So I just letting you up front know, just out of respect for who you are, but I'm asking you to respect me for who I am, that I don't have to do this. In fact, I'm here essentially as a favor to someone. And so I can do other but I used to have that argument with guys. And at one point I just went, all right, I give, you win. But some of them, Drew, were convinced of that. They could do nothing else other than wrestle. I'm like, you can't wrestle forever. Well, then we'll work in the home office. They don't need 100 guys working in the home office, Anyway.
I'm even like worst case, it's be a wrestling coach or pro wrestling, open up a place or something
or whatever. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And some have done it, so yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very good, I think, for the industry. So how much pride do you really take in your career when you look back, especially knowing once you were going in that you were going to be green and that this was going to be a risk for you, and to be as successful as you were? Do you take a lot of pride and often reflect on that?
I would say I might a better choice for me. A better choice of words more than pride is just grateful. Some words that come to mind: grateful, thankful, blessed that I had the opportunity I had with no experience, like we've talked about, and was able to, as I said, to pull it off and to have the career I had. I feel very, very fortunate. I mean, all the names we just rattled off, just earlier, very fortunate to have had the career I had and look back with really nothing but fond memories.
That's very nice. You wrestled for WCW and also Jim Crockett and the NWA and a lot of promotions. How did they and yourself kind of view WrestleMania like every year? Was it something that they really paid much attention to, or was it because I know like Starrcade was kind of uh the other promotions had their rival like show, their big show. So
Right,
how
right.
much do you think that WrestleMania kind of did it really have much influence on other promotions, or what's kind of your
I would
perspective?
imagine it probably did. I mean, I'm probably not the right guy to answer that question. I mean, for
Yeah.
me as a wrestler, I focused on what we were doing. So I focused on Great American Bash, Starrcade, Halloween Havoc, and the Clash of the Champions, and all that we were doing. And if we were aware, I mean, it's not like we weren't aware of that. I mean, we crossed paths with those guys, or for a while before the Monday Night Wars, we would run head-to-head towns. My first meeting with Vince McMahon was in a gym in Las Vegas. He was running one building. We were running another building. We just happened to cross paths in the gym, working out at the same gym. And so, we weren't oblivious to what the other guys were doing, but nor were we concerned about what they were doing, or, pay, at least for me, a whole lot of attention to what they were doing.
Yeah. And you also got heavily involved with the church following your retirement. What really inspired that, and how is it kind of comparing that life to the backstage of the Four Horsemen and everything
Yeah.
else that was a little more wild back then?
Yeah, well, and I tell you what comes to mind. It's kind of funny is immediately what comes to mind is I kind of joke and say, that God set me up. It's kind of like tongue in cheek, right? Ha ha ha. He set me up. And what I mean by that is when I look back on my life journey, Drew, and I think about my wrestling career, again, not something I was looking at getting into, but that opportunity presented itself, right? And so I took advantage of that, so to speak. But what did I do in wrestling? So I've talked about it a little bit, right? I flew on airplanes, we rented cars, we stayed in hotels, I talked on microphones in front of cameras. I entertained crowds for a living, traveling all over the world, right? And I leave wrestling, and I'm really on a quest to see, as you mentioned, what's life hold next for Nikita Koloff. And I like to say I was successful, but I was unfulfilled. And some might go, well, wait a minute, man, you were world champion. You had 30,000, 20,000 people roaring for you. And well, at the time, in the moment of it, it was exhilarating. I'd be lying if I said anything less. But at the end of the night, the cheering stops and you got to look for the next thrill. So I was successful, but I was unfulfilled. And when I left wrestling, I'd met this Christian couple, through other investments, other business ventures I was doing. They had invited me to church. I didn't grow up in church. It's not like I didn't know the story about Jesus, but I didn't grow up in church. And it certainly wasn't living for him. And about 11 months after departing wrestling, I found myself at an altar, surrendering my heart, surrendering my life to the Lord Jesus. And it was in that moment I can truly say that that sense of unfulfillment immediately went away, and I was instantaneously had this now a sense of fulfillment, of a fulfilled life. And little did I know that decision that day, fast forward to present time, here's what I've done now. now I've flown on airplanes, rented cars, stayed in hotels, talked on microphones in front of cameras. And it's like wrestling was a training for the ultimate call and purpose for my life, which is to be a minister and an evangelist. Which, if you had told me that 30 years ago, Drew, I would have said, you're crazy. There's no way I'm going to travel around the world and preach about Jesus. But now I've been to 30 different countries, all 50 states. Now I got a podcast, a weekly radio show. I've written 3 books. I'm working on a 4th book. It's unbelievable. It's been surreal. It's been surreal.
It's absolutely wild that you somehow found a job that makes you travel more than wrestling did. But
Somebody asked me that the other day. They're like, dude, it's like back in your wrestling days. I go, kind of, but now it's less pressure, and I can kind of dictate my own schedule. I'm not handed a booking sheet and told to be in this town at this time, So little less pressure, little easier on the travel schedule, even though I do travel a lot. But I love it. But it's what I was built for.
yeah, that's really great. You managed to find something to do afterwards. It just goes to show that there is life after wrestling, and
There
that
is. There's a higher purpose and a higher call. At least there was for my life. Yeah.
and not just wrestling, but in general, it shows that it's never too late for people to turn things around and find
Right.
something they are passionate about, whatever that
That's
may
right.
be.
That's right.
I really greatly appreciate your time and effort in doing this. Is there any place where people can get in touch or kind of follow what you're doing? Or
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate you having me out. I hope this, I know you're working on some school projects, and so, hopefully this will benefit your school project. And I'm gonna be praying that you graduate on time, Drew, and that
appreciate that.
all that works out. But yeah, so folks can, of course, follow me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Nikita Koloff with the number 1 behind it. That's the real me on Twitter and Instagram. On Facebook, if they want to find the real, because there's, believe it or not, there's some imposters out there, Drew. But look for me. So here's what you're looking for. Look for me standing in a river with 2 other guys. The other guys were the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, and a friend named Jason Sanderson. It was actually the Jordan River in Israel. We were taking turns baptizing each other, following the footsteps of Jesus in the Jordan River. That's the real me on Facebook. And then I would encourage people, you can actually link to my podcast and even link to a camp that Lex Luger and I co-facilitate now called Man Camp. There's links on my website, koloff.net, just koloff.net. And you go on there, you can sign up, subscribe to the Man Up podcast. Got some incredible interviews with Sting, with Magnum TA, Lex Luger, Jackson Riker, who's on Monday Night Raw, WWE. Incredible interviews on there. Check out the Man Up podcast. Check out the Man Camp. And that's how people can find me.
Sounds.
And a couple of the books I wrote are available on my store. My life story, Nikita, A Tale of the Ring and Redemption, and Wrestling with Success. One is motivational. The other is inspirational.